podcast where we talk to smart people, but not necessarily done by smart people?
That is an awesome question.
This one goes down probably on one of my top 5.
Hey, I like nutrition. I like to eat food.
This is the coolest thing ever. We're going to do this forever.
I wish I paid more attention in that class.
You know, I'm going to be honest, I don't understand that. As a man, I don't get it.
Welcome to smartpeoplepodcast.com.
Hello and welcome to Smart People Podcast, conversations that satisfy your curious mind. Thanks for tuning in. Chris Stemp here. I had to pause for a minute because every now and then I have conversations that reiterate why for over 10 years we have done this podcast. Editing on weekends, trying to build the business at nights, trying to figure out how to be a better show for you. And then I'll have a conversation like this, and I'll realize the best part is getting to talk to these people. This week on the show, we're talking to Dr. Ethan Kross. He wrote one of the best books I've read in a long time on a subject that we all understand, we all identify with. The book is called Chatter, The Voice in Our Head, Why It Matters, and How to Harness It. As you can glean from the title, it's all about the difference between the voice in our head and the chatter in our head, the negative talk. But it goes so much deeper than that. And I'm more interested in getting you into the interview than telling you about it here. A little bit about Ethan. He is one of the world's leading experts on controlling the conscious mind. He's an award-winning professor at the University of Michigan and the Ross School of Business. He's the director of the Emotion and Self-Control Laboratory. He has his bachelor's from the University of Pennsylvania and his PhD from Columbia. This book has received numerous accolades, such as an Amazon Best Nonfiction Book of 2021, an Amazon Best Business and Leadership Book, Goodreads Best Nonfiction Book of 2021, Apple Best Audiobooks of 2021. I mean, you're just in for a treat. Can you do me a favor, though? If you love this episode as much as I did, will you tell us? Will you tell people publicly? Can we see a flurry of tweets and Instagram posts about this? Whatever you can do to just spread the word. I'm not even going to plug patreon.com/smartpeoplepodcast. I'm not even going to plug that. I'm going to ask you to share this. Word of mouth is the best way we can grow. And make sure you're subscribed. Thank you for the emails we've gotten recently. Thanks for reaching out, telling us what you think, what you like. So excited to bring you this episode with Dr. Ethan Kross about his new book, Chatter, The Voice in Our Head, Why It Matters, and How to Harness It. Enjoy. Look, your book is hitting a nerve. And I don't know if it's because you told people, hey, you're not ill if you talk to yourself, or if it's just because you highlighted something that is part of the human condition, but very rarely discussed. Why do you think people are latching onto this, and what drove you to want to talk about it?
Great questions. I think chatter, which I describe as getting stuck in a negative thought loop, worrying, ruminating, catastrophizing. I think this is an incredibly common experience that we have, but because we don't learn about it at school or talk about it necessarily at the dinner table when we're growing up, we don't really know what it's all about. So a lot of people aren't sure if their tendency to worry and ruminate is normal or not. A lot of us don't understand why we even have things like an inner voice. Like, what does it actually mean to have an inner voice, Chris? I mean, I've spoken to a lot of people about this over the past year, and people have totally different conceptualizations of what this is. A few years ago, there was actually this huge brouhaha. I think that's a word. Is that a word? Can I use that?
100%. It's a smart word, too. I'm a fan.
Brouhaha, especially if we use it in that
with
connotation.
a French accent on there.
That's right. That's right. Someone said they don't have an inner voice, and a lot of people chimed in. I don't know if I have one either. What does it mean to have an inner voice? And so the hope was that my book would help on the one hand, just give people some way of making sense of their inner world, right? This inner world that is fundamental to all of us. Let's try to weed through what makes sense and what doesn't, give people a vocabulary for talking about that inner world, and then talk about what science has revealed when it comes to the diverse and wonderful array of tools that exist to help us manage that inner world. It's really remarkable. I don't actually talk about this in the book, but our struggles with our mind, getting stuck in these negative thought loops, this is something that we have grappled with since likely as long as we have been roaming this planet in our current form as people, Homo sapiens, even possibly before. I recently came across a finding that I just find remarkable. Did you know that the earliest surgical procedure on record is a procedure that was used to help people manage their emotions? It was a procedure called trepanation, and what it involved doing was taking a stone drill and drilling a hole in our skulls to release the evil spirits that were in there causing havoc. The first surgical procedure on record was a procedure that was used in part to help us manage our emotions. This to me speaks to just how profound this problem is, this problem of how do we manage our emotional life. And we've come a long way from drilling holes in our head to deal with those problems. And we've got lots of more sophisticated, and for people like me who don't have very high tolerances for pain, less painful tools as well. So I think those are probably some of the reasons why folks have taken up, have read the book, and it's certainly been a delight to chat with folks about it.
I want to touch on that, actually, what you just said about the first surgery on record. It actually goes to show that it probably is more painful to deal with emotional chaos than physical chaos. I just saw a video, and I know a lot of people know this, about how if you take a lottery winner and a quadriplegic, a few years later, they're going to have reverted back to about the same happiness as beforehand. And that's amazing, considering so much of us value and focus on our physical selves, ailments, etc., far more than our mental. Yet, as you're explaining, it seems like, and I would agree, we struggle more and perhaps are more ailed by our emotional states.
Yeah, I would, I think it's a great observation. There's some data to support this. I remember learning about a study a few years ago that looked at the impact of physical and social or emotional pain. And one of the things that I recall the authors finding is that the acute impact of physical pain is often more severe in the sense of getting your hand caught in a stove, like burning your fingers, that's more painful in an acute sense than getting rejected, as an example.
Yeah.
But usually that physical pain tends to subside, whereas the emotional pain often lingers because of what I call chatter, which is
Yes.
we experience those rejections, we get into those arguments, and we don't just leave them behind, but we keep on reflecting on them over and over again. And we keep them active in our heads in ways that are the source of enormous suffering. I mean, if I think back to the last month, let's say, and I've injured myself because I'm a klutz plenty of times. Just last night I got into bed and I stubbed my toe terribly. I screamed out. I woke up my wife. It wasn't good, but when I think about what's been most painful for me over the past month, I mean, top 10 are all emotional, social experiences. They're not the stubbed toes or sliced fingers when cooking or, sunburns for fair-skinned people like myself. They are the the catastrophizing. Oh my God, did that thing I said, is that going to be taken the wrong way? It is, the worst case scenarios that we build in our head. And as a species, we are just exquisitely adept at coming up with those worst case scenarios. We can ruminate endlessly about the past. That's why I think that chatter is one of these big problems that we face as a culture. I genuinely think this is a big thing we struggle with. I don't say that to just be hyperbolic or exaggerate. If you look at the data and you see, anxiety and depression, the impact that has in the workforce, we know anxiety and depression are fueled by chatter. The World Health Organization put a price tag on this for 2021. How much does that impact the global health economy? $1 trillion. We know chatter impacts our relationships. We talk endlessly about our problems to others. People eventually start to pull away from us. And we know it can damage our physical health. But you know what, Chris? I'm just realizing I did not answer the second part of your question, which was...
Oh, don't worry. I wasn't going to let you forget it.
Okay, I have the answer. Which was why did I decide to write this book? I can actually... I actually know exactly the point in time that led me to decide to write it. So I have been thinking about these issues. What does it mean to have an inner voice? And is that a good thing or a bad thing? Do we all have one? When does it turn into chatter? I've been thinking about those kinds of things for like 40 years, and I've been studying them formally for 20. But I didn't decide to write a book about this until about 5 or so years ago, when I was last teaching a seminar on this topic at the University of Michigan. And it was a senior seminar, and one of the students in the class on the last day of class asked me, why didn't anyone teach us about this information earlier on in life? And I didn't have a good answer to her question. And so what I did was this classic teacher move, which is, I paused. That's a good question. And I deflected. So what do other people think? Why do you think you haven't learned about this yet? Yep. And that like, for educators who are listening, if you don't have that tool in your repertoire, it works. Yep. It got me through the class. However, I didn't hear anything that the students were really suggesting after that question was asked, because in my head, the chatter started to brew. Why haven't we taught students about this? Why aren't we doing a better job communicating? And so that really lit a fire within me to start this process of trying to translate what we know about this phenomenon of chatter, of getting stuck in these negative thought loops, and talking about why that happens and what tools are out there to help us with it.
You mentioned something that jumps out to me. We will remember emotional, social pain far more than physical. And instantly what I jump to is exactly what you did. We'll use the analogy of stubbing a toe, but it could be breaking a leg or spraining a wrist or whatever. Most people don't then avoid those activities because of memories of the physical pain. So, I played sports my whole life and have encountered numerous physical ailments. But I think it's because I don't blame myself for most physical pain. I say, oh, I'm in this tough situation. I'm running fast. I tripped. There was a rock or whatever. But emotional pain, I do. Have you found any tie to that? How would you react to that?
Chris, you've just gained acceptance into my lab. If you want to start doing some research and work on your PhD, that is a fabulous question, and I'm not just saying that. That is a truly deep and insightful view of this issue we're talking about. And my brain is firing now with all sorts of possibilities. There's the sense of personal responsibility that we may have. We may feel more responsible for the social pain experiences than the physical ones. There may also be this sense that we play a role in perpetuating our social pain experiences more than the physical pain experiences. Like, time heals all wounds, and that is true of both physical and social pain. But it seems to me that our ability to extend those social pain experiences, it's really easy for us to do that. We can when we're dealing with a physical injury, and then we're generalizing here across the range of physical injuries, but let's talk. We're not talking about like terminal illness here, but instead, a sprained ankle and the kinds of run-of-the-mill negative stuff we deal with physical. We can make those experiences worse by doing what my kids like to do, which is focus exactly on the pain, right? So they'll look at the boo-boo. Oh my God, you ever have someone
Yes.
faux scream on the show before? I could do a full rendition
Let's
of
do
of
it. No, I mean,
yeah,
hey.
oh my God, it's so terrible. Look at all the blood, and as
Yep.
my daughter's like gripping the wound, squeezing the blood so it drips even more, and is getting consumed with it. Like, so you could do that to make it worse, but at a certain point, that wound will heal relatively quick and go away. With the rejections, with the faux pas that we create, I mean, we don't just it's not only that we can think about those experiences, but then we can also make them so much worse than they actually are. And there's seemingly no limit to the degree to which we can elaborate on our negative experiences in ways that make them feel worse. And so maybe, to go back to your point, maybe we have some insight into the role we're playing in all of this, and for that reason, we don't even want to touch it. Like that email that comes in at 11 p.m. at night, and we know if we look at it, we're not going to be able to go to bed. Maybe it's the same thing here. That would be a great hypothesis to test.
Yeah. I was just thinking this, not to belabor the analogy, but is there any sense of truth in, often with a physical ailment, we wrap it up, we cover it, we give it time, and we walk away. But with emotional, we actually take that scab and we pick at it. Does it all make sense to say, look, I'm going to put the Band-Aid over this and I'm going to forget about it and then move on and then I'm better?
Well, if we could do that with our emotional pain, I think in many ways we'd be much better off. In fact, one of the approaches to dealing with chatter that was very popular when I first started doing research in this area, when I first got to graduate school, was to advise people to distract themselves from the problem they were struggling with by doing something positive and engaging. So not distracting by like drinking or things like that, but go immerse yourself in your work rather than think about these relational issues or vice versa. And then once you're done distracting, the idea is you come back to the problem and you've got a little bit more perspective, you've had some time away, so you should be able to then problem solve more effectively. Here's the problem with that approach. The problem is that, number one, it can be really hard to distract ourselves from emotional pain. And most people, if anyone's ever had the experience of trying to read a book when they're worried about something, or even watch a movie, or even play with their kids, like engage in fun activities, but you just can't quite immerse yourself in those experiences because your mind is somewhere else, that speaks to the difficulty we have disengaging from the chatter when it is firing on all cylinders. So that's one problem. The other problem is that when we come back to the social pain or the emotional pain after distracting, oftentimes it's just as raw. So if we haven't done anything to reframe how we think about it, we don't actually feel better about the issue. So in that sense, like the rate of healing is a little bit different with physical and emotional ailments.
That makes sense. Is chatter simply a output of our creativity that has been negatively used due to our propensity to want to survive? Like, do you think it's just our creativity saying, hey, I'm going to think of the worst things that can happen so you don't die, and it's just continued over generations?
Well, I think chatter is a manifestation of an otherwise healthy process that is going in the wrong direction. It's like if we use the metaphor of a hammer. A hammer is a source of amazing innovation, right? Like a hammer was used to build the house that I'm sitting in right now. But used in the wrong context, it can be a massive source of destruction too, right? And now most carpenters who know how to use a hammer are using it to create, not to destroy. But every now and again, it could get them in trouble, like when they wield it too hard and go through the sheetrock. I think that's not a terrible metaphor for talking about chatter and the inner voice. So just to zoom out a bit and give everyone a way
Let's do
of
it.
making sense of all of these concepts. When I use the term inner voice, what I'm talking about is our ability to silently use language to reflect on our lives. And this is an amazing tool of the human mind. It's a tool that evolution has endowed us with that we are much better off as a species for having. So what does our inner voice let us do? What makes it so amazing? it lets us keep information active in our heads for short periods of time. Like when you try to memorize a phone number in your head, you repeat it over and over. I don't know that people actually do that anymore because of phones, but
what's funny is that's the first example that as soon as you said it, I was like memorizing a phone number.
yeah, so people still do that now. But Chris, you're not. You and I are.
I'm not a spring chicken anymore.
We're of a similar vintage. I don't know
Yeah,
if that's going to
yeah.
land with the younger listeners.
I know it. It won't.
But what might is just going to the grocery store and reminding you what your mom or dad told you to buy. Like you rehearse the list: eggs, cheese, yogurt, whatever else. That's your inner voice. It's part of what we call our working memory system, which is a basic system of the human mind. And your inner voice is a part of that. So that's one thing it lets you do. Your inner voice lets you simulate and plan. Before you go out on a date, many people will imagine, hey, what is that person going to ask me? And what am I going to say in this context? Before I give a big presentation, I'll often, in my head, go over all the talking points that I'm going to say. That's me using my inner voice. I use my inner voice to coach myself along all the time. When I'm exercising, I'm constantly talking to myself. I'm thinking, all right, 7 more reps. Then you get to get a break. 7, 6, 5, right? I'm in my head communicating, coaching myself along. And then we use this inner voice to do something else that's, I think, pretty remarkable, which is we use it to tell stories, right? Things happen in our lives that we don't expect. We get dumped, we don't land the job, whatever it is. When that happens, we try to make sense of those experiences, and we tell ourselves, we create stories that give our life meaning, that give rise to our sense of who we are, and we use our inner voice to do that. So memorizing, planning, controlling, storytelling, your inner voice helps you do all of those things. You would not want to live life without one. Now, that's the positive side of our inner voice. That captures most of the context in which we use it, except there are these situations where we try to use this tool and it doesn't help us out. Instead, it gets us into trouble. It backfires. We try to activate this tool to come up with a story to explain why we're suffering, but we don't tell a coherent story with a beginning, middle, and end. Instead, we get stuck in a negative thought loop. Oh my God, what if this and then and this? And the next thing you know, you're either dead or in jail when you go down that negative rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And that's what our inner voice does to us when it morphs into chatter, which is the dark side of the inner voice. So the inner voice, our ability to talk to ourselves, this is an amazing feat of evolution, but it's an imprecise tool. And one of my sincere hopes is that writing this book can give people a scientific guide for how to wield this tool more effectively in their lives. Because we're constantly trying to figure out how to use this tool more effectively. I think most people are constantly trying to, hey, how can I ruminate or worry less? And we stumble on tools. And some of these tools that we stumble on in our lives, they work, and science says they're useful. But other things that we stumble on that we think help us, science shows actually they often don't help, and sometimes they can even harm. And so that's why I think science is really valuable here to provide us with this really compass for navigating this terrain.
And now a word from this week's sponsor. This week's episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens. I've been drinking Athletic Greens for 2 months now. It's such an important part of my morning routine. I wake up, shower, brush my teeth, then I go downstairs, shake up my Athletic Greens, sit down at the table, and do my daily Wordle. Like I've mentioned before, I was overtaking vitamins and other supplements in the morning, and I wanted to see what all the hype was about with Athletic Greens. And oh my, let me tell you, it is definitely worth it. Athletic Greens is quick and easy, it shakes up well, and it tastes really good. It doesn't taste like you're having vitamins or trying to consume something healthy. So what is this stuff? With one delicious scoop of Athletic Greens, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging. All the things. I take AG1 every morning before my coffee and my breakfast. I get up, pour some water, pour the Athletic Greens in it, shake it up, and make sure I finish before my day gets started. Athletic Greens contains less than 1 gram of sugar, no GMOs, no nasty chemicals or artificial anything, and it still tastes good. For me, I find it supports my mental clarity and alertness. You've got to check out Athletic Greens. They have over 7,000 five-star reviews, and it costs you less than $3 a day. You're investing in your health, and it's cheaper than your cold brew habit. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition, especially heading into the flu and cold season. It's just 1 scoop in a cup of water every day. That's it. No need for a million different pills and supplements to look out for your health. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/smart. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/smart to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. One more time, that's athleticgreens.com/smart. And now back to the episode.
Yeah, actually, speaking of science, you said something there, and I wanted to ask that. You kind of preemptively answered. Any other information on what the actual neuroscience, brain science says about where this originates from? I mean, I know that's a weird question, and some people don't care, but you called it part of our something memory system, and I just find that very fascinating. Like, do we know? Can we point to a region, and here's why, and things like that?
Yeah, we could talk. We could point to not a single region, but rather networks in the brain that that support linguistic and auditory processes. They're so. You know, I've been doing brain science for about 20 years, and it's really interesting to see how this has evolved. Because when I first got involved in this work, it was all about individual regions, like the amygdala is the seat of emotion. Turns out that is far from the case. Almost, with very few exceptions, the name of the game when it comes to the brain and how it operates is we're talking about patterns of activity that stretch across multiple regions of the brain. And we're interested in how those different brain regions work in concert with one another to give rise and support different kinds of psychological processes like talking to ourselves. And it's not just different regions of the brain talking to each other in interesting ways. Sometimes, even within the same region, you can have populations of neurons talking to themselves differently. So, think about a brain region as a country that's composed of lots of citizens. It's not just whether the country is involved in an activity, it's also how the citizens are communicating with one another. So that's just some basic operating principles of the brain. But, we know that chatter, for example, it often recruits a network of brain regions that are involved in what we call self-referential processing and reflecting on ourself. This is the cortical midline. So if you were to take a chainsaw, this is going to be gory. Get ready for it, listeners.
Good with that.
If you're looking right at me and you take a chainsaw, what was the horror guy?
Was that Jason?
Jason, the hockey mask guy.
Yeah.
I think is that
I think right. Who knows?
I think so. I think you're right. Anyway, you take the chainsaw and you just kind of go straight down,
Sure.
like my head, like through my nose, split the nose in half, and then it opened me up. The cortical midline is what you see, and that's a strip of different brain regions that we find is increasingly active when people are reflecting on their own lives in perseverative ways. And so we do know where to look in the brain to see some of these different processes play out.
Okay. Yeah, I find that stuff fascinating. You mentioned when we got on another question I had written down, which was, I've heard that some people don't have chatter. And I remember being like, I'm sorry, what? Because then it just opened me up to think, wait, what else am I doing that nobody else is? And what the hell's going on? You have a really unique perspective of being able to study, talk to, engage multiple people over the course of this. What are the different experiences people have with this, and what stood out to you over that time?
Well, so it's really interesting. As soon as I define the inner voice for people in the way that I just did for you and everyone who's listening, when I talk about it in those terms, that clears a lot of things up for people. No one at that point says, I don't have an inner voice.
Got it.
What people do say, and this is supported by data that I'm aware of, is that we may lean on our inner voice for different reasons to different extents. That is, there are some people who report never engaging in a silent back and forth conversation in their minds, like, Ethan, here's what you should do. No, I don't know if I should do this. Yeah, you should do it. Like that back and forth internal dialogue. Some people say that they never experience that, that they engage in more visual forms of thinking, which I think makes sense. Like there's variability in most processes or many processes that we engage in. But if you ask those same people, are you capable of repeating a phone number in your head silently? Inevitably, they say yes. So think of the inner voice as a Swiss Army knife that lets you do lots of different things. Not all of us may use that Swiss Army knife to, take out the tweezers, but we all, use it to cut some bread. I don't know.
Sure.
Is the Swiss Army knife even relevant anymore as a metaphor?
I think so. I mean, man,
Yeah.
are we
It's
aging
hard.
ourselves?
It's hard.
If it doesn't live in an iPhone, do we not know about it?
That's
I don't
right.
know.
Well, I'm going to use the iPhone from now on as that.
There you go.
The metaphor, because that lets us do lots of different things, right?
That's true.
And we all have one.
Yeah, no, that's true. What does your research show about the way in which the inner voice turns into chatter? So as somebody who has suffered mightily at the hands of chatter at different times in my life, it was all of a sudden, right? It was out of nowhere, and then it got a grip and it doesn't leave. Any thoughts on where it originates, why it grows in some people, things along those lines?
Well, so a couple ways to answer this question. What predisposes us to experience chatter? It's a little bit of genes, a little bit of environmental experiences, and a little bit of how those two forces mix, which we're learning increasingly happens, which I think is a fascinating additional line of work. Like when you and I were growing up, we learned that you've got genes which influence your behavior and your experiences in the world. What we're now learning is that your experiences in the world can actually influence how your genes are expressed. You could think about having a piano in your cells with keys on them that are, your genes, so to speak. And we all have the same piano, but our experiences in the world influence how those pianos are played. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
So, have we figured out though, like what is the unique, what we would call epigenetic conditions that give rise to chatter in person A versus person B versus person X? No, we don't know that yet. And that's what keeps this field really exciting. We know, though, that once the chatter takes form, it does have a particular form. People are thinking in a negative, cyclical, passive way about their problems, right? They're not creating stories that have a beginning, middle, and end. They're instead pinballing back and forth, like, oh my God, what if this and then this happens? So it's a more fragmented way of thinking about our experiences that doesn't lend itself to providing us with a sense of closure. And so when you say it just keeps us there, that's in part why. Like we're not actually coming up with narratives to explain our lives. We're stuck in this just emotion-infused state of reasoning that makes it really hard for us to come up with solutions. And the other really important piece is chatter zooms us in on our problem really narrowly. So when you're experiencing it, like this is the only thing you can think of, right? You're not taking into account the bigger picture, which is often where solutions lie, but you're not taking into account that bigger picture, which makes it harder to get out of that funk. And so a lot of the tools actually for managing chatter involve helping people zoom out to see the broader perspective, which often helps them.
Well, I'm sure everybody listening is interested in those tools, and I definitely want to talk about a few. One thing that jumped out to me, I'll never forget, I talked to, actually it was a previous guest on the show who I ended up talking to for months on end about kind of this anxiety, things that I've dealt with. And one thing he said is, look, oftentimes people who suffer from anxiety believe that the anxiety is the thing that is causing them to be successful or at least avoid negative consequences in their world. So you might say you don't like it, but how often, and then when he put that in my head, I found myself like, let's say I had a deliverable at work and then I would stress, and then you can call that stress anxiety. And then I'd go, I think this is what he's talking about. If I don't feel this, I've convinced myself that I won't be successful at it. And that always changed my perspective on this idea of chatter.
Well, I think there's a couple of interesting ideas in that example, and it raises one, I think, incredibly important point that I would love to convey, which is that negative emotions actually do serve a function. And I think it would behoove all of us to recognize that. Like, we evolve the capacity to experience negative emotions for a reason. Anxiety, sadness, anger, these are not like unfortunate byproducts of evolution. These are features of how we operate that help us do well in this world when they're experienced in the right dosages, right? So a small ping of anxiety at work, like, I get it. It doesn't feel good when it's triggered, but that's why it's so amazingly useful, because when I get a little ping of anxiety 2 days before a presentation, that's a cue that says, all right, buddy, time to actually work on this talk and rehearse it. You can't just coast. You've got to actually do something. There's research which shows that experiencing a moderate level of that anxious arousal actually enhances people's performance.
Yeah.
The same is true of all negative emotions. They're viewed as functional. So the situation, I think, is a little complicated because, to a certain extent, experiencing a little bit of negativity probably does help you do your job better. Probably does help you be a better parent. Imagine how you would be as a parent if you never experienced any worry about your kids. Like, they might be like, jumping off docks into the Atlantic Ocean during a blizzard, and like you want to have that internal alarm system. So the trick, of course, though, is not to let those negative emotions permeate, not to let them proliferate. And that's what, sadly, chatter does, right? Because you experience the negativity and you don't just use it as information to help you navigate the world well. Instead, you keep on making it bigger and bigger in ways that then make it really dysfunctional.
Is there an inherent part of chatter that makes it continue to grow? Like, why is it? Why can't we just say, hey, look, there's a system in our brain that allows us to see danger and negative, and then it forces you to think through it logically, and then it moves on. Why does it get stuck in these patterns?
Well, one of the reasons it gets stuck is because we zoom in too narrowly. And the upshot here is that you can correct this. In many cases, it's straightforward to do so. I talk about 26 or so different tools in the book. These are not hard tools to implement for the most part. They're simple things you could do. There's a lot of complexity that went into their discovery, but at the end of the day, these are like simple things to implement to help broaden your perspective, and often that helps. So, like, one example is when I wake up at 2 a.m. with some chatter. It happens once every, a few weeks or so. Has this ever happened to you?
Oh, no, I don't know. Of course.
Not a pleasant experience. And actually, this is one of the questions people ask me about most. Like, what do I do about the nighttime chatter? My piece of advice number one is, to the extent possible, try to get a handle on the chatter during the day before you go to bed, because when you're sleeping, you don't have the same level of access to effortful systems in the brain that help support tools to help you manage it. But there are still things you can do if you haven't managed that chatter. And the thing that I do is I remind myself, this isn't going to be as bad as when you wake up in the morning and you feel fresh. And just reminding myself about that, it's a super simple way of thinking, right? I just tell him, you're going to feel much better about this in the morning. Because I always, Chris, feel better about this stuff in the morning, right?
But wait, is that because the parts of your brain that can help you deal with that turn on in the morning?
that's in part, yes, that is in part why that's happening, right? So you don't have access, your ability to reframe things. I mean, think about what happens when your kid wakes you up in the middle of the night. I mean, you're not ready for a dissertation defense when that
Right,
happens,
right.
right? Like you're barely even capable, I would imagine, of walking from your bedroom to theirs to tuck them back in, right? Let alone engage in elaborate problem solving over this issue. But when you wake up fresh and then you think, oh, yeah, no, well, here are all the reasons why I shouldn't be worried, or here's how I can manage the situation, or you can talk to someone about it. So you just have access to the tools when you're fresh in a way that you did not have at 2 a.m. Simply reminding yourself about that can be a powerful aid when you wake up at 2 a.m.
It's like this complex system, like one that is saying, hey, we have the ability to think through things, and one that's screaming like you're all going to die. And they both work in harmony 99% of the time for most people. And every now and again, one gets stronger. I just love the way you put that. It happened to me when the kids went back to school after the new year. Omicron's going nuts. We're like, we're all going to get it. I'm going to send them to school, and day one, they're going to bring home COVID. And so I woke up at like 4 a.m. and it was awful. Then I woke up at 7 and I was like, you know what? We'll be all right. And it was this strange, and I remember that immensely. And it sounds like what you're saying is the other part of your brain turned on and said, look, you've been thinking about this for 2 years. Here's all the things you've already decided on. Let's just go do it.
Yeah, I mean, this happened to me just a few weeks ago. My family left on our first family vacation since COVID began. And it's funny, we left Ann Arbor and we were so excited. We went to the Caribbean. It was like, we hadn't done this in so long. And then 3 days later, the whole world decided to get sick again with Omicron.
Yeah.
And to get back into the country, we had to test to get back in. And at one point, I woke up at 2 a.m. like, oh my God, what happens if we fail the test? Where are we going to sleep? It's not at this hotel because that's not going to be good for our bank account. For 14-day quarantine. Right. And so
that's logical.
How are we going to? But I short circuited this by then just saying, Ethan, you're going to feel better about this in the morning. You'll be able to think about it better. And I went right back to bed. So that's a tool people can use. There's another one I just slipped in there. You may not have caught it, though. Another tool that can help shift our perspective, zoom us out a little bit, is something that we call distant self-talk. And it involves talking to ourselves like we would give advice to another person, and actually using our name to help us really relate to ourselves like we were someone else. One of the things that I've really been struck by in my career, we've done research on this, is that we're so much better at giving advice to other people than we are taking our own advice or giving ourselves advice. Like a buddy comes to you with a problem, they can be totally spinning about this, on edge, not knowing what to do. They present the problem to you, Chris, and you can just easily coach them through that situation. But when you have a chatter trigger, when something stokes you can't think through the situation at all. And so what we've learned is that there are tools you can use to get you to relate to yourself like you were relating to someone else. And that can make it much easier for us to garner this kind of wise approach to our problems. And using your name and other kinds of pronouns, like words like you, those are linguistic tools that shift our perspective. Like most of the time we use the word you, we use that part of speech when we're thinking about or talking about someone else.
Right.
So when you think about your own circumstances, all right, Ethan, what are you going to do? This is turning on the mental machinery for advising others, making it much easier for us to work through our chatter.
I love that one. I really like that.
That's my go-to. That's my actually my two people ask me all the time. So what do you do for chatter?
Yeah.
Do you ever experience it? And yes, I experience it. I'm a human being. Have you seen the color of my hair? This isn't just so people take me seriously.
Right.
But I am pretty good at nipping it in the bud the moment it triggers, and due to these, I think some of these tools, and so the first thing I do is distant self-talk. All right, Ethan, how are you going to manage this? I do that silently, just for the record, not out loud. And then I do temporal distancing. I think about, how am I going to feel about this a week from now, a month from now, a year from now? That really helps me put this in perspective, right? That gives me hope. I'm going to feel better. So, and those are little shifts. And I do a couple other things too that just, they take the edge off, and they summate to really help you get a grip on your situation in ways that can be functional.
Hey everyone, Chris here, breaking the action. It's very rare that you can find a company that not only makes incredible products that fit amazingly into your life, but also does it in a way that serves the planet. So excited for our sponsor this week, which is Cape Clasp. Cape like Cape Cod, clasp like the clasp of jewelry. What do? They partner with ocean and marine life nonprofit organizations to launch limited edition products that raise money for vital ocean research. One of my favorite products from them is their sunglasses. They're incredibly light, they're super flexible, they're comfortable, polarized, as good a quality as $100 pairs I've had in the past, and they're less than $35. But this is the coolest part. They are made out of 100% ocean plastic. Yes, they take ocean plastics that are killing our marine life and they turn them into functional, beautiful accessories. They use eco-friendly materials to create jewelry, sunglasses, and clothing that reflect and give back to organizations you care about, like the National Park Foundation and Atlantic White Shark Conservancy. Let's blow them up. Let's finally show the world that when you do good and make good products, that's how you succeed. Go to capeclasp.com and use the code SMART for 30% off your first order. The website is capeclasp.com. Use the code SMART and you get 30% off. Save the planet, get cool sunglasses, get ready for the spring and summer. capeclasp.com. Use code SMART, 30% off your first order. Back to the show. That separating, or I forget what you called it, but when you think in the long term,
Yeah.
I've often tried to use that at work. I didn't realize, but in this sense, I'll go, okay, I'm really stressed out. And then I think back to all the jobs I've had and I go, how many of those stress me out, everyone? How many of those matter at all right now? 0. Okay.
Yes.
Can you imagine in your next job how, like, you're going to feel the same way? That's a really,
So this is a flexible tool, right? You could do it going forward. How are you going to feel about this in the future? That gives you hope. You could also get into this mental time travel machine and go backward in time and think about other kinds of experiences that you've gotten through. This is actually a tool that I've used to manage COVID and the stresses and chatter surrounding it. I've thought to myself, during moments of weakness, oh my God, another variant, another quarantine, no more exercise, not fun stuff. I've thought, well, it could be worse. Like, look, what about the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918? That was much worse. What about the bubonic plague that ravaged Europe in the Middle Ages? Like, we got through those periods. We'll get through this. So that can be another useful tool. That also touches on another, I think, important issue that I'd love to get listeners thinking about, which is, we hear so much about this importance of being in the moment, focusing on the now, and I think the messaging has gone a little bit too far. And let me tell you what I mean by that. I love being in the moment at particular times. I think it can be remarkably useful for helping us deal with distress. I'm also a fan of meditation and mindfulness. I've been meditating on and off since I was 5 years old. I wanted a bicycle for my 5th birthday. My dad was a new agey kind of guy. He got me a mantra instead. Joy of joys. Like, I couldn't wait to tell my buddies about it at school. Let me tell you. So I have nothing against those traditions. I subscribe to them. But something has been lost in translation as mindfulness and some of these Eastern philosophical practices have been commodified, which is this idea that we should always be in the moment. The human mind did not evolve to always be in the moment. To the contrary, we evolve the capacity to travel in time in our minds. And this is not a bad thing. Most of the time, it's an amazingly useful thing, right? The ability to not think about, not always be in the moment, this is what lets us experience nostalgia. It's what lets us savor past experiences. It's what lets us put our experiences in perspective. Hey, I've experienced this event at work before, I've managed it. Traveling in time in your mind lets you plan for the future. This ability is what lets us do things like, build spaceships, right? Learn from our mistakes. And so you don't want to not travel in time in your mind. What you want to figure out how to do is figure out how to travel in time effectively, because sometimes our mental travel machine does get stuck, right? We get stuck in the negative past or the negative future, and that is problematic. But, the good news there is there are so many different tools that exist to help us out.
Wow. I am so glad you said that, first of all. You just cured one of my biggest stressors in life. I've said this before on the show. I've for so long heard about living in the moment that I think about being in the moment, and it takes me out of the moment. And that's true.
I think you just coined a new Japanese koan.
But that's chatter, right? I mean,
totally.
That's the chatter.
It's chatter, or it's a theme for the reboot of Seinfeld, if that ever happens.
I love it. One thing, though, that I was curious about is, there's two parts of your book that jumped out. One is the impact of talking about negative emotions. Tell us what you mean by that, talking about negative emotions, and what is that impact?
There are two ways we should talk about this. And I think it's a crucially important issue, so thank you for bringing it up. One of the things we know is that sometimes talking about our problems to others can create social friction, and this is one of the ways that chatter can undermine our relationships, because we find people to talk to about our problems, and we just keep on talking over and over and over again, which can sometimes push other people away, because there's only so much that they can there's so much that they can handle before they themselves start to get brought down. But there's another side of this whole talking equation, which is this. So what do you do in the instance of you've got something on your mind and you want to get help with it? Do other people provide us with a potential resource for helping us manage our emotions? It turns out other people can be either a tremendous asset or a vulnerability, but the way a lot of us approach talking to other people doesn't actually serve us well. What I mean by that is this. Many of us hear that the route to feeling better about our problems is to find someone to vent our emotions to. Just express your feelings, get it off your chest. There's been a lot of research on venting, and what we've learned is venting can be very helpful for strengthening the friendship bonds and relational bonds between two people. So it's good to know that there's someone out there who is willing to take the time to just listen and hear me out. But if all you do is vent in a conversation, the problem is you feel really close and connected to the person you're talking to, but the problem is still active at the end of that conversation, and you haven't done anything to change the way you think about things to make you feel better. So you're often just as upset, sometimes even more upset at the end of that conversation than you were at the outset. So venting alone does not help with our chatter. The best kinds of conversations when it comes to chatter do two things. You find someone to talk to who does take some time to listen and hear you out. It is important to establish that connection. It is important for that person to learn about what you've gone through. But then at a certain point in that conversation, the person you're talking to, they help you reframe the experience. They start trying to help broaden your perspective. So Chris, that totally sucks, that thing at work, but didn't you have to deal with something like that last year? You made it. Or here's how I've dealt with this situation. So little ways to try to break them out of that rumination cycle by broadening their perspective. Other people are in an ideal position to help us do that. The reason why I think knowing about how all this works is so important for us is, I find it just fascinating because I'm a psychologist who loves this stuff. But beyond that, I think there's practical value. Number one, Knowing about how this works allows us to be much more deliberate about who we go to for support when we're dealing with our chatter. There are lots of friends and loved ones that I have. I never talk to them about my chatter because I know all they're going to do is get me to ruminate. They're not trying to create harm. They're actually trying to be helpful, but they think the way to help is to just ask me about what I'm feeling and just be there and listen. And that often isn't enough. So instead, I know who the 3 or 4 people are in my life that I can call for personal stuff or work stuff, and they're gonna listen to me, but they're also gonna help me reframe things. That's my board of advisors, so to speak.
Yeah.
So that's take home 1. Take home 2 is when someone comes to you for support, you now have a playbook. You know what to do, right? Take some time to listen, and then when you see your opening, try to broaden that person's perspective. Now, there is an art to doing this well, and what I mean by that is like different people, depending on the situation, require different amounts of time before they're ready to transition from just talking to reframing. So for my wife, for example, sometimes she'll start talking to me about something that's bugging her. I'll listen. I'll show love and warmth, and at a certain point, like, hey, I have a thought? Can I offer you my advice? And, sometimes I'll say, no, I'm not done. I just quiet. I need to keep going.
Yep.
During other conversations, I'll pose the same question to her. She's like, please tell me what you think. That's why I'm talking to you. So you want to feel that out. And that is the art to doing this science well.
It's the art to marriage, I would say, too. I mean,
Yes.
because as you were saying that, I was like, ooh, you're walking on thin ice. Because if you throw that reframe in too soon, you always try to fix me. If you don't throw it in at all, then you get all we do is complain to each other. So there is an art.
There is an art. And let me tell you, like, as a scientist, I'm not used to talking about art, right? I love art. It's all around, it's been the pictures in the house. I love looking at it. But science is like, 2 + 2, well, that's math equals 4. But you know what I mean, right?
I
Like
do.
there's precision, right? Variables, equations. And actually, when I was writing the book, I mean, a lot of people asked, hey, can you tell me exactly when to shift from phase 1 listening to phase 2 advising?
Ooh.
And I can't, in good faith, based on what I know about the science, give that simple prescription because there is an art to doing this well. And I don't think that should be so surprising or dismaying to us as human beings because, look, we're all so amazingly unique. I mean, one conversation over coffee that we have with one person is going to take a very different form from an amazing conversation that we have with someone else.
Right.
And we just want to be open and sensitive to those differences.
That makes sense. Well, listen, Ethan, I mentioned before I hit record that I had a couple of listeners reach out with questions. And one of them is Doug, who I told you just like crushed your book, read it, sent notes. He had a question for you.
To be clear, he did not crumple the book up.
He did not crumple it for clarity's sake. He loved every second of it. He said, you write that talking about negative experiences with others is like a social repellent. And this is what we're just talking about here. Eventually, others just don't want to be around us. Why is it so common for us to complain about an ex-wife, a manager, or a neighbor who has wronged us? So essentially, the spin on what we were just talking about there, right, is why do we need to do it in the first place?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I go back to this just wonderful program of research that a Belgian psychologist who I mentioned in the book, his name is Bernard Rimet, launched in the early 90s. And what Rimet wanted to know is when we experience emotions, like what do we do? And what he found over and over again across different cultures was that emotions act as a kind of jet fuel that motivates to share them with other people. So there are some exceptions here. Like we tend to not want to share our experiences involving shame, embarrassment, and certain forms of trauma. But for the whole other suite of emotional experiences that we have, we're often highly motivated to get those emotions out and talk to other people. And the reason we do so is because when we're experiencing emotions, we have two kinds of needs. And this is particularly relevant for the negative variety that we're talking about today, which is we have these social and emotional needs, these desires to feel connected to other people in our network. Like we have a sense of belonging and we engage. And then we have these cognitive needs, these needs we have to ultimately work through these painful experiences to move on with our lives. And we seem to have this internal radar system that tells us that, hey, other people in the world, they can help us satisfy these two needs. So that's why so many of us have those desires. Now, there is variability in this, right? Like some people are more motivated to talk about their emotions than others. Some people rely on other kinds of tools to manage their chatter. And I think that's really important to be aware of because I'm a huge proponent in there's no one-size-fits-all strategy when it comes to managing our emotional lives. I think we have evolved to have this amazing array of tools for a reason because different tools work for different people in different situations. And I think when you try to force a specific tool on everyone, that runs the risk of it backfiring a bit. But hopefully this answers Doug's question. And Doug, thank you for being such an engaged reader. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, he was. Awesome guy. Another awesome guy, actually, Steve, who I know well too. He said, how easily is the voice in our heads influenced by marketing and advertising? Is there anything we can do to combat this?
Well, I think the voice in our head is tuned by culture. And culture can take many forms. When we're young, that's our family. When we get older, it's our friends at school and teachers and our workforces. And of course, the socio-cultural surrounding, right? Marketing, social media. I think being aware of this, number one, is really important. Simply knowing how all of this works, I think, is powerful information. Right? Because you realize, number one, hey, actually, I might even be susceptible to this stuff. And once you know that, I think it licenses us to be more agentic over how we navigate the world. And what I mean by that is I'm thinking in particular about social media here. We've done research which shows, for example, that endlessly scrolling through the glorified lives of others who are in your kind of social network. Turns out that doesn't always just make us feel great. And sometimes it can make us feel bad about our lives, right? Like, oh my God, I didn't realize that this other person has, achieved every single thing I've ever desired in my life, but in the last 2 weeks, and looks great while doing it too, right? So knowing how passively consuming information on social media can maybe lead me to feel jealousy and feel bad as a result, that empowers me now to engage with social media differently, right? Maybe I mute those people so I'm not seeing the obnoxious announcements or what I perceive as obnoxious. Maybe I engage with social media more actively. Maybe I use it to share information with other people and help them out rather than just mindlessly scroll through it. So being aware of this, I think, just gives us a lot more opportunity to be deliberate about how we navigate this world. And I think being more deliberate in some cases can be good.
I like what you were saying there, that idea of agency. You go into it, you say, okay, wait, what's my goal? I have control over this. I also know, and I just had a conversation with somebody else on this show, which was I also know what their intentions are, right? It's profit driven. So knowing that, what can I do differently to get the experience I want? That's simple simple, not simplistic, but
no, but that's exactly it. I mean, it's interesting. If you think about if we stick with social media for a second, this is a new ecosystem that we spend a lot of time interacting with, but we haven't had any real playbook for how to navigate that space, right? It's so new. We're just figuring it out. And every time you figure it out, the algorithm changes or a new platform comes. But think about the lessons we have learned ourselves and the ones we give to our children about how to navigate the other ecosystem we spend a lot of time interacting in, which is the physical world. From the time our kids are little, we teach them, hey, here's how you talk to other people in this world. You don't just go up to someone and say, Chris, I don't like the way your face looks. We don't do that, right? I gave the middle finger to Christopher. Like, we don't do
did.
that. We
Yeah.
we no offense. That was just for as an example. That's the Brooklyn in me coming out
Hey, it's
here.
coming out,
So we teach our kids, like, these are the neighborhoods you should walk in, and maybe be careful here, and don't go here, and don't say that, but do go here and do say that. We are being deliberate in how we navigate the physical world all the time. And I think we'd be better off if we were being a little bit more deliberate and agentic with respect to how we navigate social media as well. And we're learning more about it. So now we can actually begin to do that.
Well, listen, speaking of social media, you've got some excellent anecdotes, stories, and descriptors about social media in your book. And we've been talking about it. The book is Chatter, The Voice in Our Head, Why It Matters, and How to Harness It. It is blowing up. I've seen it everywhere. Congratulations on that. Ethan, I can also hear for those listening going, wait, Chris, I need more. Like, I need more strategies and I need more. Yeah, that's what the book's for. All right. So my job is for us to have an engaging, enjoyable conversation. You want all the good stuff. Check out the book Chatter. Before you go, Ethan, where else are you? Are you now writing a bunch out in the world? Are you blogging? Are you on social? Where can we guide people interested in this?
Yeah, the best place to go to start is my website, www.ethankross.com. There's some resources there. You can sign up for my newsletter. And there are links to social media too, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and as well as links to my lab and research that we do there as well. So plenty of stuff to get started on that site.
That's great. And we'll link to all that. So they can just, one-stop shop, go to our website, and we'll have all Ethan's stuff. Ethan, thank you so much for being on the show. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Appreciate it.
Likewise. Hope to do it again, Chris. This was awesome.
All right. Hope you enjoyed that interview with Dr. Ethan Kross. His book, Chatter, The Voice in Our Head, Why It Matters, and How to Harness It, can be found at your local bookstore. If you enjoyed this episode and want to support Smart People Podcast, the easiest way to do so is head over to Patreon at patreon.com/smartpeoplepodcast. That'll ensure that we can keep bringing awesome interviews to you on a regular basis. If you ever want to reach out to the show, you can email us at smartpeoplepodcast@gmail.com or message us on Twitter at smartpeoplepod. And of course, if you want to stay up to date with all things Smart People Podcast, head over to the website, smartpeoplepodcast.com, and sign up for the newsletter. All right, that's it for us this week. Make sure you stay tuned because we've got a lot of great interviews coming up, and we'll see you all next episode.